Hey, and welcome, gurus, back to part 2 of this lesson where we're implementing an Azure front door profile. We're picking back up where we left off in part 1 of this lesson where we had just deployed our front door, and now we're back and our front door has successfully deployed. So we're going to go into this resource here, and we're going to go to the front door manager under settings, and here is where we'll have a good visualization of the domain that is associated with a specific route, in this case our default route, the domain it has, and the origin group it has, so that we can see the status and the provisioning state of this route that we have set up here. We're routing traffic from this domain to this origin group here. So if we copy this domain here, bring it up to the browser, paste it in and hit enter, what we're going to see is that it's not going to be available here. And the reason we're going to see that is because we introduced that intentional error. If we look at the URL here very closely, what we'll see is this is HTTPS. And because behind those application gateways, we have virtual machines that don't have SSL TLS encryption configured for HTTPS to be enabled, we're going to have to use HTTP. And so if we do that, we remove that S from there and we hit enter, what we'll notice is it still fails. And that's because we had configured it to redirect all traffic to HTTPS. So if we come back here and we go into our default route here by clicking on the default route, and then we choose to disable the redirect all traffic to use HTTPS and click update, this is going to update that Azure front door, not to force everything that's coming in over the accepted protocols to go to HTTPS. Meaning that now when we try to visit that solution using our Azure front door domain, that front end endpoint, we're going to be able to visit it using HTTP. So if we come here, back to the URL, and we remove the S and visit it over HTTP, what we'll be able to see is which of these virtual machines, either in the hub or the spoke virtual network, it is balancing us to. Again, those virtual machines are running behind those application gateways, and those application gateways are running behind this Azure front door domain or front end endpoint, whichever you'd like to call it. So if we hit enter here, what we should see once it finishes loading after a few minutes, you may see that it still says this. If you just give it a few minutes here and you do it again, what you should see is that it'll redirect. Sometimes it takes a moment to update, and we see there it is now updated and it sent us to the Cake Hub VM01. Now, if we go back to the portal real fast to our front door manager, we see that is configured for this front end endpoint that we created here. At this point, we're going to create a second endpoint. And the reason we're going to create the second endpoint is so that we can do something where we're going to have an origin group that is playing around with our rule sets. So we'll just go ahead and delete this endpoint here. We'll click yes, it'll delete this endpoint, and we're going to choose to add another endpoint here. We'll call this our ACG FD demo and make sure to provide a unique name in your case. And then we'll click add here, and it's going to create a new endpoint for us here. We'll exit out of this, exit out, and it shouldn't take but just a moment for it to create that endpoint for us. Now we don't have any routes here, so we're going to click add a route, and we're just going to very quickly create our routes. We'll call this our default route. And we see it's associated with that endpoint here. We'll enable this route, we'll select our domain, and then we'll leave everything as it is by default, except for we'll unselect the redirect all traffic to HTTPS, and we'll create a new origin group here. We're going to call this our hub origin, and we're going to add an origin to it. We're going to add our hub gateway, and we're going to select our application gateway. We'll select it there. We'll accept all of the defaults and click add. And then we're going to leave everything as it is by default. We're going to click add here. And that's going to create that route to that origin group, which is that hub origin where our hub application gateway is. And once it's done with that, what we're going to do is we're going to create another origin group. And that's going to be going to the origin of our spoke application gateway. So as soon as this is done, we'll be able to configure that new origin group by going here to origin groups. And then we're going to click add to create another origin group. Here, we're going to call this our spoke origin. We're going to add our origin of our spoke application gateway. We'll call this the spoke gateway. Then we'll select our origin type of application gateway. And then we'll select our spoke gateway here. We'll accept all the defaults and click add. And it's going to create this origin group for us. And then once that's done, we see we have those two origin groups. And then we'll move into our rule set here. And now we can click add to create our first rule set. And we'll call this our demo rule set. And then we'll give our first rule a name here. We'll call this our demo rule. And it follows a kind of if-then logic. So what we're going to do here is we're going to add a condition. And we have various condition types we can use here. As you see from this list, it's pretty extensive. But we're going to use the device type here. And we're basically saying if the device type, select our operator, we have equal or not equal. We'll say equal. If the device type equals mobile, and then we'll add our action. We're going to do one of these actions here. We could do a URL redirect, URL rewrite. We could modify the request to response headers, or we could do a route configuration override, which is what we're going to do. We're going to override our origin group here. Select yes, and then we'll specify that we want it to go to the spoke origin group. We'll specify our forwarding protocol. And so what will happen here is that basically everything's going to get by default routed to the hub origin. But if this condition is met, if the condition of device type equals mobile, then it's going to do a configuration override for that route to route it to the spoke origin. And it's going to match that incoming request based on the protocol it's using, HTTP or HTTPS. So we'll click save, and this is going to create that rule set for us. And off to the side here, we're going to open up a link in the browser that I'll provide in the resources of this lesson called appetize.io. We'll hit enter, and this is going to bring us to a in-browser iOS emulator that I just happened to find when searching on the internet for an iOS emulator, and it's in no way affiliated with a Cloud Guru, but I just found it so that I could use it, for example, to test this rule set. So now that we've got that emulator for our iPhone open here in this browser tab, we're going to go back to the portal here, and we see that our rule set has finished provisioning. We see that it is unassociated with the route. So we'll click on unassociated here, and we'll associate it with our default route. We'll click next, we'll click associate, and it's going to associate that demo rule set that we just created. And once it has associated that with that default route, then we'll be able to go into Front Door Manager here, and we'll be able to grab our Azure provided front door domain. And then if we visit that here in the browser, what we should see is that it's going to send us to the hub. As we see here, it did. And if we bring that same URL over here and click tap to play and use our 60 seconds wisely to click the home button and make our way to the Safari, and then paste in that same URL and then hit go, what it's going to do, if we zoom in very closely, is take us actually to the spoke. Again, this isn't a browser, so you have to zoom in really close to be able to see it. But we see here that it has load balanced our traffic coming from a mobile device type to the spoke VM. All right, gurus, at this point we've completed our demonstration, validated our Azure load balancer deployment, and talked a little bit about the rule sets. Now let's make our way back to the slides for some key takeaways. All right, gurus, congratulations on following along in the demo and implementing Azure Front Door. Now, the key takeaways from this lesson are to understand mainly the differences in SKUs between Azure Front Door. We have that Azure Front Door Classic, which we took a look at, which is our vanilla Azure Front Door without all the bells and whistles. And then we have our Azure Front Door Standard and Premium V2 SKUs, which are those composite services of Azure CDN, Azure WAF, and Azure Front Door. And we used a standard SKU for our Azure Front Door in this demonstration. Now, the main purpose behind Azure Front Door, as we saw in our demo, was to globally balance HTTP and HTTPS traffic to web applications across regions at global scale, and to provide the capabilities to be able to cache content at those edge locations so that we could serve traffic to users depending on how we want to load balance that solution. Now, this provides that availability to the consumer wherever they are in the world to be able to consume our web applications and have low latency. In our Azure Front Door profile, we had that front-end endpoint that we used to map to a origin group where our origins existed, and how these two were tied together was actually that route that had various things like the caching settings, the accepted and forwarded protocol, and the tying in of the front-end endpoint and the origin group. All right, gurus, thanks so much for joining me in this demo lesson. That's all my time for now. I'll look forward to seeing you in the next lesson.